The first thing Elias Mercer noticed was not the scream. It was the bonnet. A tiny blue bonnet lay in the dust outside the Silver Needle Saloon, trampled flat by wagon wheels, its ribbon dark with something that did not look like mud. Elias pulled his horse to a stop. All around him, Mercy Gap kept moving. A woman swept a porch without lifting her head. 2 teamsters unloaded flour at the general store. A boy, no older than 12, dragged a bucket from the well, eyes fixed on the ground, like the dirt held the only safe answers in town. Then, the scream came. It tore out from a narrow house behind the livery, sharp enough to stop the horses, and human enough to make every lie in the street feel visible.
"Please,"
a woman cried.
"No, not the baby."
The street went still. Nobody ran. Nobody called for help. Nobody even looked at the house. Elias Mercer had crossed 200 miles of hard country to buy winter horses for his ranch. He was 41 years old, owner of the Gray Banner Spread, a ranch large enough that a man could ride half a day and still be on his land. He had 12,000 cattle, nearly 300 horses, and a reputation that made bankers smile before he finished a sentence. He also had a grave on a hill behind his ranch. His wife, Abigail, had been dead 7 years. A fever took her in a week. Elias had bought doctors, medicine, wagons, prayers, anything a man could buy. None of it had been enough. Since then, he had become very good at owning things, and very bad at living among people. So when he found himself in Mercy Gap, a mining and ranch town wedged between red stone hills and dry creek beds, he told himself he was here for horses and nothing more. Then the woman screamed again. This time the sound broke off under a heavy thud. Elias swung down from his saddle. The liveryman stepped out and shook his head fast. "Mister, you do not want that trouble." Elias looked at him. "Who's in that house?" The liveryman swallowed. "Mrs. Cale." "And the man?" "Nolan Pike." The name moved through the street without being spoken. Even Elias could feel it, a pressure, a warning. A man whose shadow had trained a whole town to shrink. Elias picked up the blue bonnet and held it in his gloved hand. The ribbon was not mud. It was blood. He walked toward the narrow house. Behind him, someone whispered, "Lord help him." The door was latched from the inside. Elias knocked once. The crying stopped at once, which made the silence worse. A man's voice came through the wood, thick with whiskey and control. "Walk away." "I heard a woman ask for help," Elias said. "You heard a wife being corrected." A few years earlier, Elias might have turned around. He had learned that frontier towns survived by minding their own business. A man who stuck his hand into another man's fire usually pulled back a stump. But Elias looked at the bonnet in his hand and thought of the child it had been made for. "I'm going to ask one question," he said. "Is she alive?" The man laughed. "For now." Elias stepped back and drove his boot into the latch. The door cracked open hard enough to slam against the wall. Inside, the room smelled of lamp oil, fear, and old smoke. A woman sat on the floor near the stove, one arm wrapped around her swollen belly. Her name was Mara Cale, though Elias did not know it yet. Her face was bruised. Her lip was split. One sleeve hung torn from her shoulder, and on her wrist were finger marks as clear as brands. Standing above her was Nolan Pike. He was broad, red-bearded, and dressed too well for a man who claimed to be only a livestock agent. His boots were polished. His vest was new. His eyes were flat. A chair lay broken beside Mara. Nolan lowered his raised hand slowly. "Well," he said, "Mercy Gap gets fancier every day. Now rich men kick down doors for sport." Elias stepped inside. "She needs a doctor. My wife needs to learn obedience." "No. She needs a doctor." Mara looked up at Elias with one open eye. Hope tried to rise in her face, but fear crushed it before it could stand. Nolan saw that and smiled. "Do you know who I am?" "I know what you are." That removed the smile. Nolan's hand drifted toward the pistol on the table. Elias saw it. Nolan saw him see it. "If you touch that gun," Elias said, "you will not touch anything else." The words were quiet, but the room changed around them. Nolan studied the coat, the horse outside, the expensive leather gloves, the calm in Elias's voice. "Name," Nolan said. "Elias Mercer, Gray Banner Ranch." Recognition arrived like a door closing.
Everybody who bought horses in the Southern Territory knew Gray Banner. Elias did not just own animals. He owned supply lines. He owned credit relationships. He owned enough influence that small men with large egos had to think before threatening him. Nolan thought. Then he smiled again, but more carefully. "Mr. Mercer, I respect a successful man, truly. But this is private property, and this is my wife." Elias crossed the room and offered Mara his arm. "If you can stand," he said, "stand now." Mara did not move. Nolan leaned toward her. "You take one step, and I swear on that child you will beg me for the beating I gave you today." Her hand clenched around her belly. Elias held out the bloodied blue bonnet. "Is this yours?" Mara stared at it. Something inside her broke open. She nodded. "Then stand," Elias said. "Not for me, for the child." Mara reached for his arm. Nolan moved. Elias drew his revolver and pointed it at the floor between Nolan's boots. Not at Nolan, between his boots. The message was enough. Mara pulled herself up, trembling. They were almost to the door when 3 men filled the entrance. One wore a sheriff's badge. The badge sat crooked on a dirty shirt, as if even the metal was ashamed to be there. "Mr. Mercer," the sheriff said, "best let local matters stay local." Elias looked at Mara's face, then at the badge. "Local matters?" "Man and wife," the sheriff said. "Ain't lawful to interfere unless she makes complaint." "Then ask her." The sheriff glanced at Nolan first. That was all Elias needed to know. Mara lowered her eyes. Nolan said, "She has nothing to say." Elias turned his body, so he stood between Mara and every man in the room. "Mara," he said, guessing she needed the sound of her own choice more than legal procedure. "Do you want to stay here?" For a moment, there was only the stove ticking in the heat. Then Mara whispered,
No. Nolan's face hardened. The sheriff sighed like a man forced to watch someone else make a difficult day for him. Elias nodded once. We are leaving. The sheriff's deputies did not move. Elias took one step, then another. At last, the sheriff moved aside. Nolan called after them from the broken doorway. You just bought yourself a grave, Mercer. Elias kept walking. Outside, Mercy Gap watched him carry the town's secret into daylight.
The doctor lived behind a feed store in a room that smelled of carbolic, tobacco, and dried herbs. Dr. Silas Reed was 60, thin, and tired in the way decent men become tired when they spend too many years losing to cowards. He examined Mara behind a curtain, while Elias waited by the window. The whole town had gathered outside in pieces. Faces in doorways, eyes behind curtains. Men pretending to smoke while watching every breath. At the far end of the street, Nolan Pike stood with his thumbs hooked in his vest. He did not shout. He did not rage. He simply watched. That was worse. Dr. Reed stepped out with blood on his cuffs and anger in his mouth. She has 2 cracked ribs, he said. The child still moves, but she needs rest and protection.
This was not a single beating. I know. No, Mr. Mercer, you do not. Nolan Pike owns the freight line, the banknotes, half the grazing leases, and the sheriff's conscience. He lends money to men who cannot survive winter, then takes their land when spring comes. He decides who gets work and who gets ruined. This town does not obey him because it likes him. It obeys because he built a cage out of debt. Then we find someone outside the cage. Dr. Reed gave a bitter laugh. The territorial judge owes him money. The marshal's last inquiry died before it reached trial. Men vanish around Pike. Women vanish faster. The curtain moved. Mara stood there in a clean shawl, pale but upright. There were others, she said. Dr. Reed turned. You should be lying down.
I spent 3 years lying down when he told me to.
Her voice shook, but it held. There was a girl named Alma who worked in his stable. She disappeared after she tried to leave. Before her, Mrs. Weller. Before her, a Mexican washerwoman named Lucia. Nolan said they stole from him. He says everyone steals from him after they are gone. Elias felt the bonnet still in his coat pocket. What proof? Mara almost smiled, but it was a dead thing. Proof is what powerful men ask for after they have made sure nobody has any. That night, they moved her to the one house in Mercy Gap Nolan Pike did not own. It belonged to Beatrice Rowan, a widow with white hair, strong hands, and a stare that could have cleaned rust from a rifle. She opened the door before Elias finished explaining. Put her upstairs, Beatrice said. Back room. Window faces the ravine. Nolan will come, Dr. Reed warned. Then Nolan can learn I still remember how to shoot. They settled Mara into a narrow bed with a quilt folded under her knees. For the first time since Elias had kicked in the door, she slept. Downstairs, Beatrice poured coffee black enough to keep a corpse awake. Elias, Dr. Reed, and a small rancher named Caleb Voss sat around her kitchen table. Caleb had come after dark, hat in hand, rifle on his shoulder. My brother died under Pike's freight wagon, Caleb said. The wheel marks were made after he was dead. I told the sheriff. The sheriff told me grief makes men imagine things. Beatrice looked at Elias. That is what this town does now. We whisper truth after sunset and deny it before breakfast.
What would it take to make people speak in daylight? Elias asked.
Caleb laughed without humor. A miracle, or a man too rich for Pike to starve. Every eye turned to Elias. He did not like what he felt then. Not pride, not courage. Recognition. For 7 years, he had used wealth as a wall. He had hidden behind it, built it higher, called the emptiness discipline. Now, for the first time, that wall could be turned into a shield. I can send wires, Elias said. Marshal's office, newspapers, ranchers Pike has cheated, judges beyond his reach. Dr. Reed shook his head. Wires pass through the depot. Pike reads them before the ink dries. Good. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. If he knows people outside Mercy Gap are hearing his name, Elias said, he has to move before the story gets away from him.
Fast men make mistakes.
And if his mistake is killing us, Caleb asked,
then we make sure he has to do it in front of witnesses.
By morning, Nolan Pike had already started. A notice was nailed to the church door. Elias Mercer is wanted for trespass, assault, abduction, and agitation against public order. Any person aiding him will be treated as an accomplice. By authority of Acting Deputy Nolan Pike. Elias read the notice twice. Acting Deputy, he said. Dr. Reed looked sick. The sheriff signed it. Beatrice spat in the dirt. Of course he did. At the depot, the telegraph operator took Elias's messages with shaking fingers. One wire went to the marshal in Santa Fe, one to the editor of the Denver Ledger, one to Elias's foreman at Gray Banner. Send 4 reliable men,
Quiet. Armed. No drunks. No fools. The operator kept glancing at the back door.
You know he will read these. I am counting on it. Before Elias reached Beatrice's house again, Nolan's men stopped him in the street. 4 of them. Not deputies, not lawmen. Men who slept in their clothes and smiled only when pain was coming. The tallest one rested a thumb on his gun. Mr. Pike wants to speak. He can speak from wherever he is standing. He says now. Elias looked past them. The street was full of people pretending not to watch. A person could see a whole town's shame if he knew where to look. Then Caleb Voss stepped out of the blacksmith shop with a rifle. Problem? The tall man sighed. Go home, old man. Caleb's face did not change. Tried that for 15 years.
Did not improve things.
A second door opened. Beatrice stood on her porch with a shotgun. Then Dr. Reed stepped into view, unarmed but visible. Then, slowly, a shopkeeper, a laundress, a boy from the well. None of them came close, but they came out. That was enough to make Nolan's men hesitate. Elias understood something important then. Mercy Gap did not lack courage. It lacked proof that courage could survive longer than one breath. The tall man stepped aside. This is not finished. No, Elias said. It is finally started. By noon, 3 replies came through. The marshal's office acknowledged receipt but needed statements. The newspaper editor asked for names, dates, and corroboration. The third wire came from a woman Elias had never heard of.
Do not trust local law. I've been building Pike's case for 9 years. Keep the woman alive. Keep witnesses public. A friend is closer than you think. No name, only initials. L.H. Dr. Reed read it and went pale. "What is it?" Elias asked. "Lydia Hart." Beatrice crossed herself. "Who is Lydia Hart?" Caleb answered quietly. "Nolan Pike's first wife." Elias looked from face to face. "She died," Beatrice said. "At least that is what he told us. Fell from a ridge, body never found." Mara, standing in the stairwell despite orders to rest, whispered, "He kept her wedding ring in a box." Everyone turned. "He took it out when he wanted to scare me," she said. "Told me a disobedient wife always leaves something behind." The kitchen went silent. Then a rock crashed through the front window. It rolled across the floor wrapped in paper. Elias picked it up. "At sundown, bring Mercer to the square. Alone, unarmed, or the woman bleeds where the whole town can hear." Mara touched her belly. Elias watched fear move through the room like smoke. "No," he said. "He does not get to choose the shape of this." At sundown, Elias did go to the square, but not alone. Beatrice walked beside him, with her shotgun broken open to show it was unloaded. Dr. Reed carried his medical bag. Caleb came with empty hands held clear. Mara insisted on walking too. Every step hurt her. Every breath cost her. But she walked. "You do not have to do this," Elias told her. "Yes," she said. "I do." The square was already packed. Nolan Pike stood on the steps of the courthouse with the sheriff beside him. 20 armed men spread behind them. Lanterns had been hung from posts, throwing yellow light over faces that looked both hungry and afraid. Nolan smiled when he saw Mara. "Well," he called, "my wife returns." Mara flinched. Elias did not look away from Nolan. "She came to speak. Women under the influence of kidnappers say strange things." Mara stepped forward. Her voice was small at first. "He beat me the night we married." The square stirred. Nolan's smile held. "He beat me when I lost the first child. He beat me when I spoke to the doctor. He locked me in the smokehouse for 2 days because I asked for money to buy cloth. He told me Lydia Hart died because she forgot who owned her." The name Lydia moved through the square like a match dropped into straw. Nolan's smile disappeared. "Shut your mouth." Mara lifted her chin. "No." One word, not loud, not dramatic, but it cracked something. Caleb spoke next. "My brother was murdered after he challenged Pike's freight contract." A woman near the well called out, "My daughter Alma did not steal from him. She ran because he hurt her." A shopkeeper said, "He took my deed after changing the loan terms." Another voice, then another. 15 years of swallowed truth began coming up. Nolan drew his pistol and fired into the air. The square froze.
"I and the law tonight," he shouted. "And I say this ends now." His men moved in. Elias could see the trap closing.
The public testimony had hurt Nolan, but not enough. Not yet. The sheriff would call it an arrest. The undertaker would call it tomorrow's work. Then the depot bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Every head turned toward the eastern road. A stagecoach rolled into Mercy Gap under escort. 6 riders came with it, not Pike's men. Their coats were dusty. Their rifles were carried correctly. 2 wore martial stars, and walking beside the coach, alive as judgment, was a woman in a black riding coat. She had gray in her hair, a scar along her throat, and Nolan Pike's old wedding ring hanging from a chain around her neck. Nolan stared as if the dead had stepped out of the Bible to correct him. Lydia Hart stopped at the edge of the lantern light. "Hello, Nolan," And the whole town heard him whisper, "You." Lydia raised a leather folder.
"I brought depositions, forged deeds, witness statements, and 1 letter from a judge you could not buy." The marshal beside her drew his pistol. "Nolan Pike, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and the murder of Charles Weller pending further charge." For one breath, it looked like Nolan might surrender. Then he grabbed Mara. He moved fast for a heavy man, crossing the space between them before anyone fired. His arm locked around Mara's throat, his pistol pressed against the side of her belly. "Back up," Nolan snarled. "All of you." Elias felt every gun in the square hesitate. Nolan began dragging Mara toward the alley behind the courthouse. "If I hang," he said, "she hangs on me."
Mara's eyes found Elias.
No scream this time, only fear. And something else. A decision. She drove her heel down onto Nolan's foot and threw her weight sideways. The shot went off into the air. Elias moved. He hit Nolan with his shoulder, hard enough to drive them both into the courthouse rail. Mara fell clear. Dr. Reed grabbed her and pulled her back. Nolan recovered first. His pistol came up. Elias had no gun. He had come unarmed because Nolan had demanded it, and because the square needed to see which man trusted violence first. But Caleb had not come unprepared. The old rancher threw Elias a knife from his boot. Elias caught it badly, blade cutting his palm, and lunged just as Nolan fired. She bullet tore through Elias's side.
The knife drove into Nolan's shoulder. They went down together in the dust.
Nolan reached for the fallen pistol. Mara, on her knees, kicked it away. Lydia Hart stepped forward and pressed her rifle barrel to Nolan's chest. "Do not," she said. Nolan looked up at her, bleeding, stunned, furious that the world had refused to stay owned. Then he laughed. "You think this town survives without me?" Behind Lydia, the people of Mercy Gap stood shoulder to shoulder. No one answered for a moment. Then Beatrice Rowan said, "We are about to find out." Nolan Pike was taken in chains before dawn. 3 of his men were arrested with him. Others ran before the sun came up. The sheriff resigned before anyone had to ask him to remove the badge. Elias woke 2 days later in Dr.
Reed's office with a fever, a bandage around his ribs, and Mara sitting in the chair beside him.
"You lived," she said.
"So did you."
"So did the baby." For a while, neither of them spoke. Outside, Mercy Gap sounded different, not peaceful. Not yet. Peace takes longer than victory. But there were voices in the street, real voices. Men arguing openly about a new election. Women sweeping glass from the church steps. Children laughing too loudly because no one had told them to hush. "What happened to Pike?" Elias asked. "Lydia and the marshals took him east. There will be a trial." "And you?" Mara placed one hand on her belly. "I slept through a whole night without listening for his boots." The words hit Elias harder than the bullet had. He looked away. Mara saw it. "You had someone," she said. "A wife." Elias closed his eyes. "Abigail." "You could not save her." "No." "But you saved me." "I almost got you killed." "You gave me a choice. That is not the same thing." Winter weeks later, Mara's daughter was born in the upstairs room of Beatrice Rowan's house, while winter pressed white fingers against the windows. She was small, angry, alive. Mara named her Hope, and when Dr. Reed handed the child to her, every person in that house forgot how to breathe for a moment. Beatrice cried first. Caleb pretended not to. Elias stood in the doorway with one hand braced against the frame, feeling something inside him loosen that had been locked for 7 years. He had thought grief was a room,
A place where a man lived after the world took what he loved. But maybe grief was also a door. Not out, never entirely out, but open enough for someone else's life to matter.
The months after Nolan Pike's arrest were not clean or easy. His accounts had to be untangled. Deeds had to be restored. Families had to admit what they had done to survive him. Some apologized, some left. Some stayed and learned to look one another in the eye. Lydia Hart took back the freight office Nolan had stolen and turned it into a cooperative. Beatrice's boarding house became the place where town meetings happened because nobody trusted the courthouse yet. Dr. Reed trained Mara to assist him. At first, she only boiled instruments and changed bandages.
Then she learned herbs, fever signs, how to calm frightened patients, how to hold steady while blood scared everyone else. She was good at it, better than good. By spring, people came asking for Nurse Mara before they asked for the doctor.
Elias remained in Mercy Gap longer than he admitted he would. First until his wound healed, then until Nolan's trial started, then until Hope could survive the cold nights, then until the new sheriff was elected. His foreman sent wires from Gray Banner. Ranch profitable, cattle strong, need decision. Elias read those wires on Beatrice's porch while Hope slept in a basket near Mara's feet. "You should go back," Mara said one evening. "To my ranch?" "To your life." Elias watched the town settle under lantern light. The depot bell rang once.
A dog barked. Somewhere, Caleb was teaching 2 boys how to mend a fence without swearing, which seemed impossible, but noble. "I built Gray Banner after Abigail died," Elias said. "Every pasture, every herd, every horse. I thought if I made something big enough, it might fill what was gone." "Did it?" "No." Mara nodded, as if she'd known the answer. "Mercy Gap will not fill it either." "I know." "Then why stay?" Elias looked at the blue bonnet.
Beatrice had washed it as best she could. The blood never came out completely. Mara kept it folded on the windowsill, not as a wound, but as a witness. "Because this place does not need me to fill a hole," he said. "It needs me to help build something." That summer, Elias sold half his interest in Grey Banner and used the money to buy Nolan Pike's old debt ledger at court auction. Every note, every signature, every chain Nolan had used to hold Mercy Gap by the throat. On a hot July morning, Elias carried the ledger to the square and set it on a barrel. The whole town gathered. Mara stood beside him with Hope in her arms. Lydia Hart stood on the other side, holding a match. Elias opened the ledger. "Any honest debt remains between honest people," he said. "But every note signed under threat, every paper Pike used to steal land or silence a family, ends today." He tore out the first page. Lydia lit it, then the next, then the next. Soon the barrel was full of flame and black ash rising into the clean sky. Nobody cheered at first. They only watched, as if afraid the fire might be another trick. Then Caleb Voss laughed. It was a rough sound, cracked from disuse, but it spread. People began bringing papers from coat pockets and aprons and old tin boxes, notes they had hidden for years, promises they had been forced to sign, receipts for fear. One by one, they burned. Mara watched the smoke climb. "Looks like a funeral," she said. Elias shook his head. "No," he said. "A planting." 3 years later, Mercy Gap still had mud in spring and dust in summer. The church bell still cracked on the high note. The depot roof still leaked in hard rain. Men still argued over water rights, cattle prices, and whose mule had kicked whose fence down. Freedom had not made the town perfect. It had only made repair possible. Mara became the first woman in Mercy Gap paid by the town to provide medical care. She kept a small room behind Dr. Reed's office with clean sheets, boiled instruments, and a shelf where the blue bonnet sat inside a glass case. Not hidden, not worshipped, remembered. Hope grew into a sturdy child with black curls, serious eyes, and a habit of asking questions adults were not ready to answer. Elias built a small house on the ridge above town. Not a mansion, not a monument, just cedar walls, a wide porch, and windows facing the road so he could see who was coming. One evening, Mara found him there watching Hope chase fireflies through the grass. "You ever miss being the richest man at Grey Banner?" she asked. Elias smiled. "I was never the richest man there." Mara looked at him. "My wife was alive then." The answer sat between them gently. Mara did not try to soften it. Instead, she placed the blue bonnet in his hands. "I kept this because it reminds me of the day I asked for help, and someone answered." Elias ran his thumb over the faded ribbon. "I kept seeing it in the dust," he said, "before I heard you, before I knew your name. That little thing lying there while everyone walked around it. They were afraid. So was I. But you moved." Elias looked down at the town. Lanterns glowed in the windows. A fiddle played near the depot. Lydia's freight wagons stood ready for morning. Caleb's grandchildren ran across the square where Nolan Pike had once fired a pistol and called himself the Law. Hope caught a firefly in both hands and shouted for everyone to look. Elias did. So did Mara. So did half the town. That was the difference.
Once, Mercy Gap had heard a woman scream and looked away. Now, when a child called out in wonder,
Every window opened. And under the first stars of evening, with the blue bonnet folded in his hands, Elias finally understood what his money had never bought him. Not peace, not forgiveness, not the life he lost. Something smaller, something stronger. A place where silence had been broken and never fully returned. Sometimes that was how a town was saved. Not by a perfect man, not by a clean victory, but by one person hearing a scream, stepping into the dust, and refusing to let fear be the only law left standing.